Imagine hearing the person who loves you most in the world say something you never expected. Tian Xiwei was sitting quietly in the family home when her grandfather looked directly at Zhang Linghe and made an astonishing demand. "If you truly want to marry my granddaughter, leave acting behind." For several seconds, nobody moved. Tian Xiwei stared at her grandfather as though she had misunderstood him. Zhang Linghe remained completely silent. The career that had become such an important part of his life was suddenly sitting at the center of a family decision. And the reason behind the demand was not what anyone expected. Her grandfather was not asking him to quit because he disliked his acting. He was not saying Zhang Linghe was incapable of becoming a good husband. He was not even saying that Tian Xiwei should never marry him. His fear was much deeper. He believed that the life of a famous actor could eventually become too complicated for the woman he loved. He had watched Zhang Linghe become admired by countless people. He knew that fame brought opportunities. But he also believed fame brought attention, pressure, rumors, constant travel, demanding schedules, and endless people wanting a piece of someone's private life. And when he imagined Tian Xiwei entering that world permanently, he became afraid. Before we uncover what happened when Zhang Linghe was asked to choose between his career and the woman he loved, make sure you stay until the end and tell me what you would do if you were in his position. Would you give up a successful career for love? Or would you ask the person you love to trust you enough to continue your dream? Because the answer Zhang Linghe eventually gave was something Tian Xiwei's grandfather never expected. The story began several days before the confrontation. Tian Xiwei already knew that her grandfather was worried. She could feel it every time his name came up. Whenever someone mentioned Zhang Linghe, her grandfather became quiet. He never insulted him. He never called him a bad person. In fact, he admitted that Zhang Linghe seemed respectful and sincere. That was what made the situation even more confusing. If he believed Zhang Linghe was a good person, why was he against the marriage? Tian Xiwei eventually asked him directly, "Grandfather, what are you afraid of?" Her grandfather looked at her for a long moment. Then he told her that sometimes a person could be good while the life surrounding that person could still be difficult. Tian Xiwei did not understand. Her grandfather explained that Zhang Linghe was not simply a young man preparing for marriage. He was a public figure. His career required attention. His career required travel. His career required him to work closely with many people. His career meant that strangers would constantly have opinions about his appearance, his relationships, his decisions, and even his private life. And that was exactly what frightened him. He did not want Tian Xiwei to spend her married life watching the world constantly examine her husband. He did not want her to become consumed by rumors. He did not want her to feel insecure whenever another actress appeared beside him on screen. He did not want her to become anxious whenever he traveled for work. He wanted his granddaughter to have a peaceful home, a quiet home, a home where she could put down her phone and stop worrying about what strangers were saying. Tian Xiwei listened carefully. Then she asked him a question. Does being an actor mean he cannot be a good husband? Her grandfather shook his head. No. He said that was not what he believed. He believed that Zhang Linghe could be a good husband. But he was afraid that the entertainment industry could test that relationship again and again. That answer stayed in Tian Xiwei's mind. She knew her grandfather loved her. But she also knew that he was asking for something enormous. Then came the day of the meeting. Zhang Linghe arrived at the family home. He greeted everyone respectfully. Tian Xiwei smiled when she saw him. But she could immediately tell that something was different. Her grandfather was unusually serious. He asked Zhang Linghe to sit down. Zhang Linghe looked toward Tian Xiwei. She gave him a small, reassuring smile. But she was nervous too. The grandfather began by asking Zhang Linghe about his plans, his career, his future, his goals. Zhang Linghe answered honestly. He said that acting was not simply a job to him. It was something he had worked hard to build. It was something that challenged him creatively. It was something that had given him opportunities he had once only dreamed about. His grandfather listened. Then he asked the question, "If you marry Tian Xiwei, what happens to your acting career?" Zhang Linghe paused. He said he hoped to continue working while building a family. The grandfather looked down. Then came the sentence that changed everything. He told Zhang Linghe that he wanted him to consider leaving acting. Tian Xiwei immediately looked shocked. She turned toward her grandfather. She asked why he would make such a demand. Her grandfather answered calmly. Because marriage required presence. He wanted someone who would be there. Someone who could spend ordinary days with Tian Xiwei. Someone who would not constantly be traveling. Someone who would not be surrounded by cameras. Someone whose private life would not become a public discussion. Someone who could build a home without the constant pressure of celebrity life. Then he looked directly at Zhang Linghe. He said that if Zhang Linghe truly wanted to marry Tian Xiwei, he needed to decide what mattered more, his career or his family. The room became completely silent. Tian Xiwei immediately objected. She told her grandfather that love should not require someone to abandon everything they had worked for. Her grandfather replied that he was not asking for perfection. He was asking for sacrifice. That word made Zhang Linghe look thoughtful. He understood where the request was coming from. His grandfather was not trying to humiliate him. He was testing how serious he was. But there was another side to the situation. Zhang Linghe had dreams too. He had worked for years. He had built his career step by step. He had endured difficult moments. He had accepted demanding schedules. He had spent countless hours working toward the position he had reached. Giving all of that up would not be a small decision. It would change his entire life. Tian Xiwei knew this. She looked at him and quietly told him that he did not have to answer immediately. Her grandfather disagreed. He said that eventually every marriage required choices. Zhang Linghe looked at him. Then he asked why quitting acting was the only way to prove his love. The question changed the conversation. Her grandfather remained silent. Zhang Linghe continued. He said that love should not mean destroying one person's identity so another person could feel secure. He said that if he married Tian Xiwei, he wanted to build a life with her. But he also wanted her to know the person she married. His dreams, his ambitions, his responsibilities, his weaknesses, his fears, everything. Tian Xiwei's eyes became emotional. She understood exactly what he was saying. He was not choosing his career over her. He was asking whether they could build a relationship where both people were allowed to remain themselves. Her grandfather looked at him carefully. Then he asked another question. What happens when your career becomes more demanding? Zhang Linghe answered that they would communicate. What happens when rumors appear? They would communicate. What happens when people misunderstand you? They would communicate. What happens when another actress works closely with you? They would communicate. What happens when you have to travel for weeks? They would communicate. His grandfather asked what would happen if Tian Xiwei became lonely. Zhang Linghe looked at her. He said he would never pretend that distance could not be difficult, but he would make sure she never felt forgotten. Those words touched Tian Xiwei deeply. Her grandfather remained quiet. Then he explained the real reason behind his demand. He had seen too many people lose themselves after becoming involved with someone whose career consumed their life. He had watched relationships become complicated because one person's work always came first. He had watched families struggle with long periods apart. He had seen how public attention could turn small problems into enormous ones. And he did not want Tian Xiwei to discover those difficulties only after marriage. He wanted to confront them before she made the decision. That was why he had demanded that Zhang Linghe quit acting. It was not because acting was bad. It was because her grandfather believed that removing the career would remove many of the risks he feared. But Zhang Linghe did not agree. He believed that the solution was not to eliminate the dream. The solution was to learn how to balance the dream with the relationship. That became the central disagreement. Tian Xiwei was caught between them. On one side was the grandfather who had spent years protecting her. On the other side was the man she believed understood her heart. She finally stood up. She told her grandfather that she did not want him to make the decision for her. She said she understood his fears. She appreciated his protection, but she wanted to choose her own future. Her grandfather became emotional. He told her that was exactly what he feared. He was afraid that love could make her ignore the difficulties ahead. Tian Xiwei replied that love did not make her blind. It made her willing to face the difficulties with someone she trusted. The room fell silent again. Zhang Linghe looked at Tian Xiwei. Then he looked at her grandfather. He said something that completely changed the mood. He told her grandfather that he would never ask Tian Xiwei to choose between him and her family. He would never force her to abandon the people who raised her. And he would never expect her grandfather to stop worrying about her overnight. Instead, he asked for time. Time to prove that he could build a successful career and still be a responsible partner. Time to show that fame did not have to destroy a relationship. Time to show that a public career and a private family could exist together. Her grandfather asked how he could prove that. Zhang Linghe answered with something simple. Through his actions. Not promises. Not speeches. Not dramatic declarations. Actions. He would show respect. He would communicate. He would protect their privacy. He would make time for Tian Xiwei. He would listen. And when his career became demanding, he would not expect her to simply endure it. He would work with her to find a balance. Tian Xiwei began crying. Her grandfather noticed. He quietly asked why she was crying. She told him that she had never seen the two most important people in her life talking about her future like this. She said she was grateful, but she was also afraid. Her grandfather reached for her hand. He told her that he only wanted her to be safe and happy. She replied that she understood. Then she asked him to trust her. That was the moment everything changed. Her grandfather finally admitted that perhaps he had been trying too hard to protect her. He admitted that he could not remove every difficult situation from her future. He could not control who admired Zhang Linghe. He could not control the demands of acting. He could not control public attention. He could not control what strangers said. All he could do was make sure his granddaughter entered her future with her eyes open. Zhang Linghe thanked him. He said that he understood why he had been questioned. He understood why his career worried him. And he promised that he would take those concerns seriously. But he would not quit acting. Not because he cared more about acting than Tian Xiwei, but because he believed that the person Tian Xiwei loved was the man who had spent years pursuing that dream. He did not want to become someone else simply to prove that he was worthy of her. He wanted to become a better version of himself while continuing to be honest about who he was. That answer left Tian Xiwei speechless. Her grandfather slowly smiled. Not because he had gotten what he wanted, but because he finally understood Zhang Linghe's position. The conversation had changed. It was no longer about whether Zhang Linghe would quit. It was about whether he could prove that his career would not become more important than his family. And that was a challenge he was willing to accept. Her grandfather finally said that perhaps he had asked the wrong question. Instead of asking whether Zhang Linghe was willing to quit acting, perhaps he should have asked whether Zhang Linghe was willing to learn how to balance acting with marriage. Zhang Linghe nodded. He said yes. Tian Xiwei smiled through her tears. The tension slowly disappeared. Her grandfather told Zhang Linghe that he still had concerns. He would probably continue to have concerns. But he would no longer demand that he abandon his career simply to prove his love. Instead, he wanted one promise. Never make Tian Xiwei feel like she comes second. Zhang Linghe agreed. The grandfather then turned toward Tian Xiwei. He told her that she also had a responsibility. She needed to understand that marriage to a famous person would not always be easy. She could not allow every rumor to control her emotions. She could not allow strangers to determine how she felt about her husband. And she could not expect him to abandon every dream simply because the outside world was difficult. Tian Xiwei agreed. The family conversation ended with something nobody expected. Not a dramatic rejection. Not an ultimatum. But understanding. Her grandfather had started the meeting believing that Zhang Linghe needed to give up acting. He ended it believing that perhaps the real sacrifice was not quitting a dream. Perhaps the real sacrifice was learning to share that dream with someone else. That became the most important lesson of the evening. Love does not always require someone to abandon who they are. Sometimes it requires two people to make room for each other. Sometimes it requires patience. Sometimes it requires difficult conversations. And sometimes it requires a protective grandfather to step back and allow the people he loves to make their own decisions. As Tian Xiwei and Zhang Linghe prepared to leave, her grandfather called them back. He had one final thing to say. He told Zhang Linghe that he would continue watching. Zhang Linghe smiled. Her grandfather said that he did not mean watching him like a fan. He meant watching how he treated Tian Xiwei. Everyone laughed. Even Tian Xiwei. The tension was finally gone. Her grandfather had not completely forgotten his fears. But he had found something more valuable than certainty. Trust. And Zhang Linghe had learned that winning the approval of a family was not about saying the perfect words. It was about showing through everyday actions that the person you love truly matters. Tian Xiwei had also learned something. Her grandfather's demand had not come from a desire to control her life. It came from fear. Fear of seeing her hurt. Fear of seeing her become lonely. Fear of watching fame create problems that she had never experienced before. And although his solution had seemed extreme, his intention had always been protection. In the end, Zhang Linghe did not have to choose between his career and Tian Xiwei. Instead, he had to prove that he could make space for both. And perhaps that was the real test her grandfather had created from the beginning. Not whether Zhang Linghe would quit acting, but whether he would understand what it meant to become part of a family. The answer would not be proven in one conversation. It would be proven over time, through patience, through trust, through respect, through communication, and through the countless small choices that eventually become a marriage. So now the question goes to you. If you were Tian Xiwei's grandfather, would you have made the same demand? Would you ask a famous actor to leave his career before marrying your granddaughter? Or would you believe that true love should allow both people to continue pursuing their dreams? Tell me your answer in the comments. And if this story kept you watching until the very end, subscribe to the channel, because the next chapter could reveal whether Zhang Linghe eventually earns Tian Xiwei's grandfather's complete trust, and whether the promise he made that night becomes the biggest test of their relationship.